about a third the size of this room. And so we found Dylan, who is a graduate student at Hunter School of Urban and City Planning. I never get it right. So he has been working with us the last few weeks, going through our treasure chest. And it is a treasure chest. We have things from the 60s, the Welfare Island days, the early development days. I mean, we have plans from an exhibit in the Metropolitan Museum that was in 1970. For 2 weeks, they did an exhibit on Welfare Island, the interim report. And we have the actual poster, and we also have the film, what's it called? Anyhow, a transparency of it. We have a lot of these technical reports on how to build a tram, our traffic management, reading about the traffic-free island. Very interesting. I never knew we had such a big fiction collection. So this project isn't quite finished yet because now he's going to go through more things, but we had to give him a reprieve. And so we really knew nothing about Roosevelt Island when he started this. And to say he's a little obsessive is something. But he's really, I think, enjoyed the project so far. Have you? You're still talking to me?
Yeah.
And so I've enjoyed it, you know. I just love to look at this stuff. So I want to introduce Dylan and welcome him. First of all, welcome him. He lives far off in Astoria, so we have to welcome him to the island. Okay, Dylan? Hi, Debbie. Thank you. You're welcome. You want to raise it up?
Yeah. Cool. Hi everyone, how are you doing? Good. It's good to hear. It's a bit cold today. It's like 60 degrees this weekend. Never know what to wear anymore. So my name is Dylan. I am a graduate student at Hunter University. And last semester I started a research project on Roosevelt Island, and that is how I met Judy. And that research project is still not finished. I still haven't finished that class because it is so detailed and in-depth, and I really felt like I could not wrap myself around how much history has happened on Roosevelt Island. And even so, like with this project, to focus on just one aspect is almost impossible without talking about all of it. So that's what I'm going to try to do to you guys today. Explain a very long history about probably like one of the most interesting places in New York City. And I'm aware that a lot of you live here, so I'm sorry if anything I'm saying is redundant or if I miss any details. There's just too much to talk about. So, all right. So we'll start. So my research prompt for this was. Boom. Okay. So my research prompt. So how did Roosevelt Island deviate from its master plan in 1969, and why? So originally, before I even did the class, I'm a nerd. I like urban planning. So I knew about Roosevelt Island beforehand, and I read the master plan and thought it was fascinating, but I never really dove into it until this project. And I noticed that there was a lot of things that either happened or didn't happen or were altered. So basically, the presentation we're going to go through, so it'll be 4 sections. So the first section is going to be history. So we're going to be looking at the history of Roosevelt Island, pre-development and post-development. And then we're going to be looking at the island that nobody knows, secondary. So that's the 1969 plan devised for the island. And then we're going to be looking at building North Town, which is what you're sitting in right now, and living in it during the first couple of years. And finally, we're going to look at the deviations and how what you experience today on Roosevelt Island differs from the 1969 plan that was laid out. All right. So if anyone forgot where they were on the way here, this is where you are, Roosevelt Island, or that little star right here. And it's a 2-mile island. It's about 1 Manhattan block wide. It's 23 feet at its highest point. I think that's over by the Octagon somewhere. And then, oh no, it's probably the Cornell Islands now. But the population currently is around 12,000 people. That's some of you guys, I'm assuming. Raise your hand if you're from Roosevelt Island or living here. Cool. Okay, we got some experts. I gotta make sure I'm doing it right. So let's start with the history. So 1637, oh, sorry. All right, so 1637, the island was occupied by the Lenape natives. It was purchased by the Dutch. So once it was purchased by the Dutch, it handed over a few times, eventually landing in the hands of Robert Blackwell, who owned that pretty little house over there. And in 1796 is when that house was built. Eventually, they just used the island for agricultural purposes, and the city purchased it in 1828 for municipal uses for $32,000. Eventually, they paid them another $20,000 because the original land acquisition was actually illegal. And it was, in today's dollars, $52,000 in 1828 is $1.69 million. So I feel like that's a steal. That's like what I pay for my groceries every week. So, to get a whole island, you know. So looking at some of the institutions that were built here once the island was under the city. So we have the New York City Penitentiary. So it was built with stone quarried right here on the island. And it held some of the most notable prisoners were Billie Holiday, Mae West, and Boss Tweed. So the location of the penitentiary is going to be right now where Cornell Tech is. And then the second, built in 1837, is City Hospital. So originally it was built to serve the penitentiary, but then it opened up to citywide care. And a fire leveled the original hospital in 1858. And this handsome building that you see right here was what replaced it in 1861. And this was a really hard part of the history to research because this hospital changed its name 4 times for the history. It was called City Hospital, then it was called Island Hospital, then it was called Charity Hospital, then it went back to City Hospital, then it was called Renwick Hospital, and then it went back to City Hospital. So imagine trying to find 200 years of history on one hospital that has like 8 names. So, but that was a challenge. So next one we have the New York City Lunatic Asylum. So signed by Jackson Davis. Very famous for Nellie Bly, for committing herself there for 10 days and publishing 10 Days in the Madhouse. And it was renamed to Metropolitan Hospital in 1892. Any of you guys are like American Horror Story fans, big show. The interior of this actually inspired that show, which is really fascinating. So then we have the Alms House. So originally the Alms House was located in Lower Manhattan. Alms House was an institution where basically petty crimes would go, or like the drunks on the street would go to like work off their debts. And then eventually a workhouse was added in 1852. And that was for more like petty crimes where like it wasn't enough to get you sent to the penitentiary itself. And eventually it was renamed to City Home for Dependents. Then we have the famous Smallpox Hospital, which is still sitting on the lower tip of the island. Designed by James Renwick, who's actually the same architect of the Island Light on the north end. And it was the nation's first hospital built for smallpox. Eventually the smallpox got a vaccine. Hopefully no one got smallpox here. And then it was eventually a nursing school absorbed into City Hospital.
I'm gonna turn the microphone up a little.
Up a little bit? Okay.
Well, we have a balcony.
Oh, sorry, I mumbled. Maybe after the presentation, someone could take over. You could do karaoke. Sure. Okay. All right, I'll talk a little louder for the meantime.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so originally the building that you see in the middle was the original hospital, and the 2 wings on the north and south. There we go. Were additions built later in 1903 and 5. All right, so then we have 3 more little landmarks I want to talk about. So we have the Island Light, like I talked about, built by somebody named James Renwick. And it was actually built by prisoner John McCarthy, who was a prisoner and insane. I guess you had to pick one, the penitentiary or the insane zone. So he built that with his bare hands. And then we have the Chapel of the Good Shepherd, which was commissioned by William G. French. And it was built for the almshouse and the prison because French thought that the people of this institution served a place to go and find community, read, and yeah. And then we have Strecker Laboratory, which was built as a part of a city hospital for research. So eventually, Blackwell's Island changes its name to Welfare Island, and this is very creatively done because there was a lot of institutions on the island that provided welfare. So that was done under a decree in 1921. And then we start the generation of reformed healthcare on the island. So in the 1930s, there was a big push to modernize healthcare on the island because of the tainted reputation. The story of Nellie Bly, and a lot of press got out about the conditions on the island that people were in. So in an effort to reverse that, they started building more modern hospitals. So the first one you see here is the Welfare Hospital for Chronic Disease. You might know it as Goldwater. This is it under construction in 1937. So it was the first modern chronic disease hospital in New York City, and the attention to architecture by Isidore Roosevelt was done with the intention that he wanted patients and the people caring for the patients to have a better experience in healthcare, and he did that through architecture. And you can see these wings were made and connected through a central spine. That was to do so to let more light in the building. The building itself was 7 pavilions, all connected, and it had 27,000 windows across the entire building. So then we go through World War II, and after World War II, Bird S. Kohler Hospital, which still exists on the north side of the island, Judy works there, tells me about it all the time, was built. It was delayed because war efforts were more important than for the materials. So this is still a facility for chronic disease. It was named for Kohler, who was head of the welfare department in 1918 and 28. So then finally, oh my God, no more ferries. We got the Welfare Island Bridge in 1955. So it was the first direct land connection to the island. Before that, you had to take an elevator down from the Queensboro Bridge. There was an elevator in a storehouse building built in 1918, where if you ever walk on the pedestrian path of the Queensboro Bridge, you would simply just take a little ledge over into the building and take an elevator down, or you could walk if you're trying to burn calories. But it also had elevator lifts for cars as well, so that was the only way that you could access the island via vehicle. And in my opinion, I think the Welfare Island Bridge was a little too late, because by the 1950s, the island was in a period of decline. So there was decentralization was happening in the city, where they were building institutions in multiple places as opposed to focusing on one place, which was Welfare Island. So the City Home for Dependents closed its doors in 1953. Those patients were given to Kohler or other facilities. The Metropolitan Hospital as well gave its patients to Goldwater and Kohler. And then finally in 1957, City Hospital closes, and trolley service, which was the last trolley line to actually exist in New York City over the Queensboro Bridge, ceased in the same year. So all of that happened in 1 decade, and the island was basically kind of like what you see right here, a bunch of abandoned buildings. But then there was still activity on the island though. Kohler and Goldwater were still operational. This brings us to the second point where I'm going to take a drink of water. The island that nobody knows. So this is the period where we really started to talk about redevelopment. It was very obvious that the island was valuable real estate in the middle of the East River. And the Mayor Lindsay, who was elected in 1966, housing was one of his main campaign promises. What's interesting, and you probably will never hear of again, he was a liberal Republican who really valued housing. And he saw Welfare Island, as an opportunity to really drive his housing promises home. So by 1967, the remaining facilities are Goldwater, Kohler. We had a juvenile detention center in one of the buildings from Metropolitan Hospital, and an FDNY training facility. There was also a place where NYU tested monkeys, but they don't like to talk about it. So don't tell them that I told you that NYU tested monkeys in Ireland. So, Governor Rockefeller, Mayor Lindsay, and an urban planner named Edward Loeb, who had a lot of ties up in Boston and New Haven, Connecticut, came together, and they were really eyeing Welfare Island for development. This is a little survey that they did. There's no way you're going to be able to read this. So over here we have City Hospital, Goldwater. This is city services that were added, such as a central nurses home. There was a city home. There was a convalescent camp, which is a part of city home, the Metropolitan Hospital, and Burgee Kohler. So this was done in 1965. This is like a year before Lindsay came to office. Basically, this is what the island looked like. It was a bunch of abandoned, dilapidated buildings, as opposed to the two that were operational. So, in the I think this is the fastest I've ever seen politics move doing this research. In 1968, Lindsay created the Welfare Island Development Committee. Within a year, they delivered the report to Lindsay himself, and Rockefeller established the Urban Development Corporation, the New York State Urban Development Corporation. And the next year, that report is delivered to the mayor, and the UDC obtains the land from the city with a 99-year land lease. So basically, the city owns the land that you're standing on right now on Roosevelt Island, and leases it to the state through an organization that's controlled by the state on a 99-year land lease that will expire in 2068. 99, not 100. Brain can't do the math. It's 647. So that brings us to the island that nobody knows. So a lease agreement was required that the master plan, there was a requirement that a master plan was needed to develop the island. So the UDC hired partner architects Phillip Johnson and John Burgee to do this master plan for them. So basically, they put together a report called The Island That Nobody Knows. Don't you should nobody still know it, because then maybe your rents will be lower. But they put together an island that nobody knows. And the plan followed the guidelines given by the Welfare Island Development Committee, which actually, this is Phillip Johnson, this is John Burgee. John Burgee was actually on the committee that did all the recommendations as well. There's a lot of internal hiring for this process. So this is the plan that they put together with the island that nobody knows. So we have the retention of the smallpox hospital and Strecker Laboratory. City Hospital is retained, Goldwater, and then, actually, I'm sorry, there we go, boom. Smallpox Hospital and City Hospital are retained, as well as Strecker Laboratory. We had Goldwater, which existed until 2014. We have the Sports Park, which is here today. In Town Square, North Town, this is heading north. Blackwell House, which is right there, so we're right here. And this is South Town. And a key part of their plan was their plaza. So this was the town square. So the town square exists basically today in the middle of what is now known as Riverwalk. So right here is the subway station, MTA Roosevelt Island subway station. And basically what they did was they connected a town square through an interior arcade similar to the ones that exist on Main Street. And then it would open up to a marina on the other end. And this was the heart of their plan. They really loved this part. They thought it was the social aspect of the island. People would pass through this twice a day at a minimum to get to where they needed to go. And they said that this plan would not work without it. So this was really their driving force. And then we look at the north of the island. So this is North Town. Good Shepherd is preserved in this plan. We have the Motor Gate. Then we have an ecological park. And then we have the Metropolitan Hospital Administration Building saved, Kohler, and a lighthouse, Blackwell Lake. So, their plan for the time, this is 1969, it was very, very forward. So basically it focused on mixed income living. There was a lot of moderate cost housing as well as low income housing. There was no luxury housing included in this development originally. It was also done on a car-free design. So you can see that here with this picture. So we have the Welfare Island Bridge right here, which pulls into the motor gate, where you were supposed to park your car in the motor gate and then walk down and then take the transit, which is provided by Roosevelt Island, up and down Main Street, or walk. You were never intended to have your personal automobile enter unless it was for deliveries or drop-off. So their plan also emphasized historic preservation, like we looked at it in their plan. It focused on a lot of structures that already existed, which especially for the 60s was rare. Historic preservation back then wasn't so much in vogue. So then we also have intentional sightlines. So once again, looking at this map, you see Main Street right here with the motor gate. You'll see how Main Street kind of like deviates instead of going in a straight line. That was actually done intentionally. So it's done to trick your brain so that your walk is the same distance, but your brain thinks it's shorter because your line of sight is interrupted by other things. So even though it's the same walk, it creates more of an interesting pathway, which, like I said, tricks your brain into thinking. So you also have sight lines done in the east-west direction. So that was done to preserve the unique views of the Queens skyline, which didn't exist at the time. And then the New York City skyline, Midtown, that was very crucial to their plan. Obviously, you see all the green space mixed in between. And then finally, not finally, long list, ABAC. So ABAC, which still exists today for Northtown, was crucial. That was to get garbage trucks off the street, because garbage trucks aren't very pretty. So they wanted to keep those off the street, so they they brought the ABAC system here to Roosevelt Island. It was the second time it was ever used in the country, the first being Disney World. And then of course we talked about the Grand Town Square and Marina and all the public space that they incorporated as well. So now we move on to Roosevelt Island, living here, constructing it. So we start with Northtown. So as soon as that deal was signed, signature, dotted on the lines, demolition immediately began across the island. Any structure that was not deemed historically significant was immediately demolished. So what you see right here is the wing of Metropolitan Hospital, or the Lunatic Asylum, which the wings were demolished, but the admin building was kept on it. And then construction begins on Northtown Phase 1. So 2,100 units of mixed income housing paid through the Mitchell-Lama housing program, which started in 1955. That was done to produce low-income housing for people. And Motorgate also began a tram started construction, which was not a part of the original plan, but MTA, as you know, likes to push things back and back and back and back and back. So, to solve that solution in the interim, they only authorized a temporary tram, which is the Roosevelt Island tram that you know today. They include the electric buses to bring you to and from the Motorgate. The infrastructure upgrades before any development happened on this island for Northtown, all your sewage is just dumped right into the East River. So we just do that, and the ABAC system, of course, and the historic building rehabilitation of parks. So a quick little timeline. Over the course of about 3 years, well, if you started at 71, it's 6 years, a lot happens. They build all 4 housing developments. They complete half of the Motorgate. Sports Park is done. ABAC gets done. The tram begins operation May 17th of 1976. And then also restored the Blackwell Lake, the Blackwell House, and the church in the, why am I blinking on the church name? Good Shepherd. There we go. But this is not all easy, as nothing ever is. So the Urban Development Corporation was frantic to complete this by 1974. It was also John Lindsay in part pushing them because John Lindsay wanted this spectacular thing done under his administration, so that he could brag about it. But construction schedule was lagged, eventually opening, like I said, in 1995 and 6. But then there was also issues under the Nixon presidency. So Nixon put a housing construction moratorium done in 1973, which stopped housing construction for a couple months. And by the end of that, he was basically like, yeah, we shouldn't have our hands in housing. The government is the largest slumlord in the country. And from there, Mitchell-Lama was discontinued, which was the main program that funded almost all of Northtown. And at that point, the UDC also paid for the housing through bonds, which was, they were beginning to have issues paying those back. So that is yes. Okay. So here we go. So we have the Walker Island Bridge. This is the helix being constructed in 1972. And then we have a cute little New Yorker cover. These people look like they're enjoying their life. Advertising the New Deal for Living in Roosevelt Island in 1976. So, I wasn't alive then, but Judy told me a lot about it. So life on
Thank you, Phil.
life on Roosevelt Island. So it was it was, looking at it back now, it was a successful production of mixed income diverse housing done by the government, which is very rare to say. And much of the island actually remained still vacant after Northtown was completed. So to the north you had the Metropolitan Hospital in Fuller, but then to the south there was Goldwater and City Hospital was still all vacant. It was difficult to attract people because of the subway pushback, so it kept getting pushed back and back and back and back. So it had an issue attracting the necessary retail that they anticipated and grocery along Main Street. So as population increased slowly, retail came in to Main Street. And then eventually, because the UDC eventually defunct, the Roosevelt Island Operating Corporation took over in 1984. So, now that we talked about all that, I want to get on the break. Alright, so now we're going to look at the deviations between the 1969 plan and what we experience today. So, their development was basically stagnant except for a couple projects during the 80s and the 90s. So during this time, the residents of Roosevelt Island, there was a lot of guerrilla urbanism and interim uses, community gardens. The residents of the island upkept those historic structures, kept them from falling. And the economic and political trends really saw the housing market slump. So no one was really jumping to build on the rest of Roosevelt Island. And then the subway station, of course, like I said, keeps pushing back, eventually opening in 1989. But the initial service only brought you through to 21st Street and Queensbridge, over the Queensbridge houses. But the one development that did happen during this time was Manhattan Park. So this was originally known as Northtown Phase 2, and it began construction in 1986. It took about 3 years to construct, and they, in concession with RIHS, which is Roosevelt Island Corporation, they extended Motorgate by about 700 spaces. So there's a big difference between what you experience in Northtown, between what you experience in Manhattan Park. So Manhattan Park was designed a little bit like a Corbusier tower in the park design, where it's a building in its own foundation, not attached to others, surrounded by park space. This is a complete deviation from what you experience now on Main Street, where these buildings are interconnected through retail and parks, and I mean, you could even walk through the buildings. So it was a completely different experience. Something that made this development a little bit contentious is that they built 5 buildings, and to build on Roosevelt Island, you're required to build a certain amount of affordable housing. So instead of integrating the housing, they put all the low-income housing in one building, and they don't get balconies. No balconies for the low-income people, only the rich people. And these were marketed as luxury units, and this is the first time that the word luxury has been used. All of Northtown was marketed as mixed income, new type of living in New York City, but this was the first time when people started using the word luxury. Here's a cute little ad on an MTA bus. We moved to Roosevelt Island and we love it.
You can use that bus.
It probably is the buses used now, right? So basically, in an attempt to revive development interest, the General Development Plan was amended in 1990 by RIHS. And this was where major key points in the master plan were altered. So we're going to look through these next slides, just looking at basically everything that's happened up to this date. So we have Northtown that we just talked about, 2,100 units across 10 buildings. Without the mini schools, there's 2 schools now. I've got a library that we're sitting in currently. A community center, fire department, 3 parks and plazas, and 2 landmarks were preserved. We then have Manhattan Park in 1989. It gave you 1,107 units, 20% of those being affordable, across 5 buildings. Motorgate expansion, like we talked about. Then we have the Octagon, which is 2006. So this brought online 500 units across 2 buildings, with 100 of them being affordable units. It preserved the main entrance of the Metropolitan Hospital, and it provided a community space and a park and a plaza. So we have Cornell Tech. So this is a project that's being done in 3 phases. Currently, phase 1 is completed. Technically, it added 350 units to the island, but those are only student housing, so I guess you can count those. And then it's across 5 buildings, and it brought the first hotel to the island, which is the Graduate Hotel. And it's interesting. This is interesting because the original development plans totally advised against not putting a university on the island because it's so disconnected from the rest of the city. They have a nice coffee shop though, so it's a good place to do my work. And then we have Riverwalk, which is the final development, housing development, maybe for those who have land or something, on Roosevelt Island. So it began. It opened. The first building, 2 buildings, opened in 2003. It was approved in 1999. This is what Southtown was. So Southtown changed its name into Riverwalk as a rebranding thing. And eventually in 2025, the tall building that you see right there, which is parcel number 9, will be completed and people will begin moving in. The interesting thing about Riverwalk is that actually exceeded the affordable housing requirements on the island. 40% of the units of Riverwalk, which is over 2,000 units, were labeled as affordable. So, additional development, we have a couple parks, Octagon, Four Freedoms. Goldwater was demolished in 2014. We have the bringing back of ferry service in 2017, which was over 50 years before that, before there was a public ferry to the island. You then have the Cornell Interim Park, that this is hills over there, which will eventually be phase 2 and 3 of Cornell. And then the Chapel of Holy Spirit was recently rehabilitated up to the north, which is now an event center. Alright, so now we're gonna look at these maps. So we just looked at this. This is a 1969 plan from Johnson and Burgee. And we're gonna look at what we have today. So Goldwater was demolished, like I said, in 2014. The smallpox hospital was kept, and so was Strecker, and these red buildings are historic buildings saved. The city hospital was lost in 1994 after a fire, and the structure was deemed structurally unsafe, as well as just too expensive to rehabilitate, and nobody wanted to take on the cost of doing so. Move north, and we have Cornell Tech. Southtown, which was what Riverwalk was. This is right here, was where the town square would have been. We have Blackwell House and Park. This is Northtown. So this is where we are right now. We're gonna move north to Manhattan Park, and then we move further north, Motorgate, Octagon Park, the Octagon, Kohler, and Lighthouse Park with the purple. And we can look at this a little bit more in detail, focusing on the southern section of the island. This is a 1969 Johnson and Burgee plan, and we're gonna do a little transition. Boom. This is what we have today. So Southtown, like I said, 9 buildings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I can still count. And right here, like I said, is where we had the arcade connected to the marina, and then the subway station. So this is where the heart of the island was supposed to be in the original plan. We have the tram here, which was not originally envisioned. The sports park was built, and then we have the Blackwell House with the park right next to it. Looking back again at 1969 and moving forward to today. So I think the most biggest thing lost here was the ecological park, which is now Octagon Park and some of Manhattan Park. All of Northtown was constructed except for phase 2, which is what Manhattan Park is. The Good Shepherd was preserved. We have an expansion of the Motorgate. The Sanctuary was preserved, which was not originally a historic building that John and Burgee intended to preserve. We have the Octagon Apartments. Kohler still exists, and then we have the Lighthouse Park. Thank you so much. Alright, so now we're getting into the reasons why. So, there were strict development requirements. So the general development plan required that a certain amount of affordable housing be built on the island. So, to attract a developer, most developers want to make a profit when they build housing. You know, housing shouldn't be for profit. So it was initially really difficult to get people to come onto the island and build. and they had to do so with concessions. Then we have the fluctuating economic cycle. So in the 1970s, New York City was experiencing a period of decline. And this was because of the previous decades of white flight caused by suburbanism and the expansion of the federal highways. A lot of people fled, mostly white people fled to the suburbs and purchased homes and got jobs out there. And that took a lot of the tax base out of New York City. So when the tax base was drained, there was still a large population requiring services which the city could not provide. And the city actually went into bankruptcy in the 1970s because of that. And then we have, moving on to the next point, American car culture. Americans love their cars. And Burgee and John were very revolutionary for the time in 1960 to say, no, park your car and you can walk. So today what we have is you're allowed to use your personal vehicle and we're on an island. But what Americans, like I said, are very on with their cars. So then we have geographic restrictions. So we're on an island, right? So it's hard to get things on an island. Even with just the bridge, getting building materials here is difficult. Before the subway, getting people here was difficult to commit and live here. So having the geographic restrictions of an island prevented some development from happening further down. We then have the change in construction and architectural practices. So Northtown was built in brutalism. Most people hate brutalism. I hate brutalism. But I think Northtown was done in good taste, where the brutalism actually complements the landscape around it. Then you have, looking to the south, you have Riverwalk, which is glass box. I'm not sure what that architectural style is called. Modernism, I guess. So there's conflicting ways of how the buildings are built. Because in the Johnson-Burgee plan, the buildings were stepped in a way where everyone would have a view of the city, and the buildings weren't towering over you, creating shadows, as opposed to the newer buildings like in Manhattan Park and Riverwalk, where the buildings are kind of just straight up out of their foundation with no setbacks. We then have the change in housing policy. So Mitchell-Lama, like I said, was the program that really allowed for Northtown to develop. That was cut, as well as the affordable housing has just never been really funded well in New York City. I think in 2020 there were 25 million applications for 44,000 units of affordable housing in New York City. So massive changes in housing policy just didn't allow for people to want to develop here. And then we have the complicated land use breakdown. So the land is on a lease. So basically, like I said, the city owns the island still, and it leased it to the state for 100 years. And then the state subleases the parcels that the developers build on. So there's two leases going on, and then it eventually expires, and who even knows what's going to happen when that happens? Like, you just pick your building up and go, you know? And then finally, pressure to develop the island in a timely manner. So originally, the UDC anticipated Roosevelt Island, the entirety of that original plan that I showed you, to be done in 8 years. It's finishing now in 2025. So they're a little off with they were an undershot. So here's just a quick little rundown of what we have today versus what was promised in 1969. 6 historic structures were saved, except for City Hospital, but we gained the church. The projected population is 6,000 less than what Johnson and Burgee anticipated, which is interesting because there's more units on the island than they anticipated. So what they wanted was they wanted families to live on Roosevelt Island. So that's what they were accommodating for, but the market has really shifted more towards more bedrooms and studios. So then commercial, I can find commercial data. The only offices really used on the island are by RIHS. The affordable housing goal was met. You didn't get that town square harbor, but you have Bridge Over Plaza, which is really nice. So the farmers market on Saturdays. Love biking over here from Astoria. Goldwater was demolished even though hospitals were meant to be retained. The height limit, which is critical, was increased. Johnson and Burgee only wanted buildings to be 12 stories tall, and that was to be done so that it didn't create a canyon over Main Street. But in order to meet the density requirements, Edward Logue of the UDC increased the heights to do so. All right, and then the last three. We didn't get the ecological park, but we got the subway eventually. Who knows how many people moved away before that so much. And then the tram and the ferry. And that is what you have today in Roosevelt Island. I'd like to thank you for allowing me to for like 3 months.
I'm sorry, we're not meeting tomorrow, I've canceled.
These are my 63 resources.
No, go back to his resources. And this is what have you been working on? It's less than a month, right?
No, it's been like 4 months.
4 months, okay. But diligently. I mean, it's unbelievable what this discovery. Most of us can't be, though we've lived here, some of us 30-something years, we don't know 1/10 of what we've seen. So,
I think it's impressive that like such a small piece of land has had so many lives. I mean, like even just the site of Cornell, it was farmland, then it was penitentiary, then it was a hospital, and now it's a university. So within a span of 250 years, it had 4 different uses, which is just a really quick turnaround.
Do you know what the plans are for the other phases of Cornell?
No, they haven't released them. They
And I
haven't.
wonder if they're gonna take up the space that's now that really beautiful hilly park.
Yeah, that is a projected area that they're going to use, but they haven't released any renders or any plans. I mean, I don't really see anyone using that university, so.
okay, any questions? Matthew, who's been here only 30-something years.
I'm a newcomer.
He's a newcomer.
You had a data point there that Mitchell-Lama ended in 1976. That may have been when Mitchell-Lama stopped building new buildings. But Northtown has been part of Mitchell-Lama well into the 21st century.
Yeah, no, Mitchell-Lama stopped offering new agreements after that. But the program still continues as long as it's able to be upheld in the buildings that were constructed with the,
Thank you for that, really impressive. What do you see as the future for Roosevelt Island and all the work you've done in its past?
Explaining in a story?
I think that right now, Roosevelt Island is pretty much built out. I don't see there being much space to really develop more. There's a steam plant that's to the north, the Queensboro Bridge, which I think would be a really interesting space to rehab into a museum. I think this place is well worthy of a museum. And yeah, there's not really much more to do. They kind of did everything.
Is the steam plant the space that's between Manhattan Park and the Octagon? Where is the steam plant?
The steam plant is in the back of the train station. It has a stack which is in very bad condition.
Right.
The steam plant is owned by the Health and Hospitals Corporation that also owns a steam tunnel that goes up the East Road all the way up to Kohler. So the city and the Health and Hospitals Corporation and RIHS are trying to figure out what to do because the Health and Hospitals doesn't want the building, and it's in discussion to be continued. Yes.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, I might not have noticed that on your slides, but when was the Four Freedoms Park in the original plan?
The original plan, The original plan wasn't actually thought of yet. Well, it was in thought process, but it wasn't in concrete plans yet. It was in 1973 where Louis Kahn released it at the unveiling of the renaming of Roosevelt Island. But then it took until 2012 to build it.
Again, the question.
Does the island sewage still go directly into?
No.
the-
No.
They connected it to Queens.
No, they connected. We donate our sewage to Queens.
I mean, if it rains a lot, it probably doesn't.
Where does it go to the Bowery Bay plant or?
Probably.
I'm not sure.
Stephen?
Are there known asbestos issues?
I can't hear you.
Are there known asbestos issues with the steam plant that we know of?
Absolutely, it was built in 1939, and it's full of asbestos. It's also, they use number 6 fuel oil, so the area next to the steam plant, there's a field that's between the steam plant and the tennis bubble. It's all contaminated, it's all a brown field, so no matter what they do, keep it or it's gonna be, a massive project.
Vivian?
So there was no school plan at the beginning. I was there when they opened the new school, 1992. There was a school plan for
You're in the school.
Yeah, so originally what they did was they had these things called mini schools. So they had 4 mini schools. So each of the buildings of Northtown, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, they each had their own school. So you're actually sitting in the Eastwood School right now.
Any proposals for flood protection on the island?
Flood protection.
Yes, oh.
It's a hard one to do when you're on an
There,
island.
okay. There's one plan for flood protection, it's up by Kohler, because Kohler flooded in Hurricane Sandy. And they have a massive amount of money from FEMA to build a berm around Kohler Hospital. But there's one problem, they left out the lighthouse and they left out Octagon. So it's something in discussion between the health and hospitals, FEMA, and Roosevelt Island, because the north end of the island did flood, and part of Kohler had to be evacuated. Luckily, Goldwater was still here. So there's definitely a deep thought about flood protection. If you look at Cornell, everything is built way high, so it wouldn't be effective.
What got you interested in Roosevelt Island in the first place?
So when I was little, grew up on Long Island. I originally wanted to do architecture, but then I really don't like math. So I went into urban planning, because I'm very more people focused and I'm a big history nerd. And I just searched a lot on the internet and I actually found this. When I got the chance to take my history course in my grad school, I was like, yeah, I want to do this. I live on 36th Avenue, so this is where I come because there's landmarks in Astoria. And yeah, it's just a fascinating place. I mean, it took me about 6 months of doing this research to really wrap my head around it. And I mean, like, I had to create maps and like very large note lists to like really understand how to grasp what's occurring here. Yeah.
Okay.
Any more questions?
Anyone? Okay. Well, I thank you very, very, very much. And you don't have to come to work tomorrow. You can have the day off. He was nervous. I don't know why. He didn't. He sent me the program a half hour before. But it's wonderful. Thank you so much, and we all appreciate it. A lot of people ask me who are not here tonight. So Rick is going to put it on his blog in the days to come, so you'll be able to see it again. Now, what?
Got my bad side.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, it's tequila time for you. Okay, so there's a few announcements before we close, because a lot of people came in after we closed.